Hello and thank you for joining me today. My name is Jan from Thinking Stamping and I'm an independent Stampin' Up demonstrator from New Zealand. Today I'll be sharing with you how I made this card using this Artfully Layered stamp set and die from the January to July 2022 mini catalogue, Artfully Layered, and the Tropical Layers dies. I made this card as a design team card for the Colour Inspiration Challenge, and so I just thought I'd share how I made it. As you can see, I've already done the die cutting up here already, and most of the card's pretty straightforward. So the two things that I'm going to concentrate on showing you are how I did this inlay of the dies and how I created this background from a blank piece of paper. So I'll just go through the things you need, then I'll just concentrate on those two things. So first up, a Pacific Point card base. It's cut at 14.8 high and scored at 10.5. I've got a Sahara Sand mat, which is cut half a centimetre smaller, so 14.3 by 10. And then I've got a piece of white to go in the centre, which is 3 millimetres smaller than the mat. You can use ordinary white cardstock, or you can use shimmery white cardstock, whichever you prefer. On the example, I've just used ordinary basic white, but I think for this one I'll use shimmery cardstock. And I've got on the inside, I've done a little bit of doodaring, so I've got some Sahara Sand for a mat and some white, which I'll decorate at the end. So first up, I've also done the happiest birthday. Fortunately, the happiest birthday wishes from the set fits perfectly with the second die from the stitched rectangle die set. And so I've also cut a second piece out of Pacific Point, and I'll just layer that together before I mount it up. So let's get started. I've used this die and I've cut it twice. So I've cut it once out of Coastal Cabana and once out of Sahara Sand, and that's how it comes out. And most of the time you're probably just going to use it as a skeleton leaf. But what we're going to do to just give it a bit more solidity is we're going to take the outer leaf, which was the Coastal Cabana. I've cut this little strip of Sahara Sand here. I'm just going to lay it on there. That's just so I can sort of roughly see how it'll fit. Mark with a pencil where it goes, and then I'm just going to get my paper snips and snip that out. Snip that, and what this is going to do is just going to give me a little base to attach the leaf to. Now, if I was going to attach the leaf directly onto the card base, I wouldn't bother with this step, but because it's on top of other things, I want it to have a bit more firmness. So I'm now going to just wiggle that one in there. Bit much glue, but will survive. And now I'm just going to put a tiny little dab of glue on the exposed pieces, and then I'm going to take the centre from my Sahara Sand leaf and just pop it in, and the little bit of glue on that piece of card will just hold it in place so that later on I can glue it onto the actual card base. So nice little trick for inlaying dies is to just give yourself a little pillar to glue on with. Okay, so that's done. Nice and easy. Now, the main part of the show is the background. Is that my, oh no. Okay, so that's my shimmery cardstock. And I started this by picking out some of the inks which were the challenge colours, which were Pacific Point, Granny Apple Green, Coastal Cabana, Balmy Blue, and the fifth colour was Sahara Sand, and you can see how I've already included some Sahara Sand here. So I've got my piece of shimmery white cardstock, and I'm going to use my blending brushes to first of all just lay down some colour. So I just keep my blending brushes, one for each colour family, and then in between uses I just wipe them off on this microfiber cloth so that they're ready to use. And just like you're inking a stamp, just a bit of tap, 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 and on your scrap paper just so you get rid of any excess, and then just a bit of random inking. Nice and simple. Perhaps we'll have a bit down here. You know, if you do a whole series of cards like this, of course, you're going to end up with each one being slightly different. So now we'll have a bit of Balmy Blue. Again, tap, tap, tap. Build up some colour. Now, once you've built up the colour as much as you're happy with, and because we are doing overstamping and adding in some die cuts, a few little splodgy bits like that actually adds interest. You probably don't want it to be exactly as smooth as if you were leaving it completely unmasked. So now that I've laid down some colour, what I like to do next is add in some stamped elements using exactly the same colours. So I'm going to start with Balmy Blue, and I'm going to take the open leafed stamp from the Artistically Layered stamp set, the Artfully Layered stamp set. Okay, inking it up as always, tapping rather than mashing, tap, 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 not mash, mash, mash. And then we're just going to put in 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now I am deliberately putting one down here because I want it to sort of carry on when I add the die cut element. So this one I am carefully placing. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But the rest are more or less random. I'm starting with the biggest stamp first, just because it's easy to fit the smaller stamps around a bigger stamp than vice versa. So I'll do that. And pop the Balmy Blue aside. Next I'm going to go for Coastal Cabana. And I'm going to use the little script stamp. You'll notice on most of my stamps I just don't attach the cling labels. With this one I do, because I found it was quite tricky to work out which way was up and down. So even with the words. Okay, so now I'm going to come in and add, I'm going to keep my paper straight on the grid paper because I've lined up the stamp straight with the bottom of the tapping, tapping, tapping. I've lined up the bottom of the stamp with the bottom of the block. So as long as my paper's straight, we should be fairly sweet on straightness. Okay, so we've done some of that. And now I'm going to come in with the Granny Apple Green. Looking at that, I'm actually wondering whether I did my original sample with Pacific Point rather than Coastal Cabana, but it doesn't matter. Okay, so now I'm going to use this little solid leaf shape. And again, tap, 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 tap. Because even though this is a small stamp, it's quite solid, you do have to pay attention to having ink on it. Make sure you've got enough ink. And even more important that you do the 10-second count to try and get a good ink transfer. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, cross your fingers. Not perfect, but that's all right, because I have a plan B. And I'm going to come down here and do some as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. A couple more for luck. 11, 12. Much better. Okay, so now I've got my base done. And I'm going to add in my frond. So just some little streaks of glue there. And we'll pop that there. And then we're going to get our nicely layered up leaf. And this is why it doesn't matter that that little strip was only in parts of it, because now we're going to give a bit of glue to the whole thing. I'll pop that in there. Just give it a hold down so the glue can have a chance of setting and attaching, because it is going over a not flat surface. Okay. And now we're going to put a little bit of glue on that mat. Just going to spread it out a bit. We're going to take the pick tool, and we're going to get some of these little leaves, because this die cuts out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of these little leaves, and I've already cut them out with Granny Apple Green. They're quite difficult to get hold of, so I'm going to use the take your pick tool, dab them in the glue, and I'm going to stick them over, because I was going to layer the two lots of leaves together, so that's why I wasn't overly concerned when I got a few patchy bits, because that'll just help me decide where I'm going to put these little leaves. Perhaps we'll have one there, and one there. And you can see how helpful the take your pick tool is for this. And then we better have some over here, or else it'll look like it was just trying to cover up. Oops. Cover something up. Which, although I have covered something up, that wasn't actually the original purpose of them. It was to just bring in some extra bits of colour. So we will stick one there. And last one, where will we put them? Well, I think we might just stick them here. Okay. Now, there's one other thing we need to do before we move on. Okay, just going to add a little bit of glue and layer that up. Now, that is going to go there. So, we are going to get our piece of Sahara sand. Glue. Again, don't use too much, because you don't want it to ooze out. Don't put it too close to the edge, because you don't want it to ooze out. And I don't know where that piece of stuff came from. Okay, now this is why I like glue, because I've got some wiggle room to just straighten that up, make it nice and straight. And you'll see that I've got some twine on there, so I'll show you how I do twine. Okay, so I want it to go through the middle of where I'm going to put the sentiment, so I can just hold it there like that, and then roughly, and then on the back I'm just going to make a little mark, which is going to equate to about halfway through that sentiment. Now, I'm going to get the tape runner, and I'm just going to put some tape, and this is the equivalent of sewing tacking. So what I'm going to do there is I'm going to get my twine. This is linen twine. I find it indispensable. I use reams of it. I'm going to start there where I put the mark. It's going to just be held in place by the tacky Stampin' Seal. And then I'm just going to come back. Make sure it's straight. Back. And then I'm going to come back a third time and snip it. The Stampin' Seal runner is not designed or intended to be the permanent holding of that. When I go to attach it to my card base here, I'm going to make sure that I get glue on the ends. Okay, and then I'm going to just bit of glue, bit of glue, bit of glue, and line it up, give it a press. Okay. Righto, I like to have a generous bow. I find that if I muck around trying to save twine, I end up wasting twine because I haven't got enough to tie a nice bow. So I've cut myself 35 centimetres there, which is actually a ton. I'm going to add some dimensionals to the back of this. I like to use enough dimensionals that you don't get what I think of as the sag factor. I don't want to come back to this card in a month when I give it to somebody and find that because I didn't use enough dimensionals, the sentiment's kind of got a sag like a sad old sofa on it. So I like to put a decent amount of dimensionals. I'm putting it off to one side, so I've got room for the bow. And then I'm going to thread my piece underneath there. Oops. And I'm going to tie it. And I also, the other reason I tend to cut plenty of twine is because I do like a generous tail. You know, I don't want it to look like a lamb that's been docked. I want it to look sort of swooshy. So I'm going to probably leave most of that. And I did get a bit carried away. I've got plenty there. Okay, now the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some of these faux sea glass shapes, which are embellishments out of the January to June 2022 mini catalogue. And I'm just going to add a couple, well actually because you always go in threes, I'm going to add 3. I could go for the green ones, but I think I will go for these little blue ones. 1. So I suppose I could, there's no reason why I have to stick to one colour. Anyway, you can add whatever embellishments you like in whatever colour you like, but I'm just going to go for 3. And again, watch that triangle shape because you want them to try and draw attention to the sentiment. That's, you know, one of their functions. Okay, now I am just going to do the inside for you. I'm just going to whiz that through. I'm not going to talk because I'm going to speed it up, so you can watch this bit or not, depending. And there you have it, the inked and stamped blended background. Now that is a technique that I often use. It's a really simple way to incorporate lots of colours and give you a nice vibrant background. Remember, we started out with just a piece of plain paper, and you can use it to bring in any colours that you want into your design. Blend and then just stamp in using the same colours. Thank you very much for watching. There is more information about this card on my blog and my Facebook page, and the details of those will come up on the end card. And if you live in New Zealand, there is a link to my online store on both of those places if you'd like to shop with me. Thank you.